Welcome back to Irregular Mind. I am your host, and we are continuing our journey through this series US History Understanding This Country. Before we dive into today's topic, let's quickly recap what we covered in the last episode. We explored the arrival of Christopher Columbus, the devastating consequences of European contact on indigenous cultures, the Columbian Exchange, and the rise of the Spanish Empire in the Americas. We also talked about the harsh realities of systemic slavery, the infamous Middle Passage, and the beginnings of transatlantic slave trade, a chapter of history that reshaped continents and lives. If you have not listened to that episode or any of the earlier ones, I strongly encourage you to go back and check them out. Each episode builds on the last, helping to paint a complete picture of the fascinating and complex history of this land. And while you are at it, don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family. If you are enjoying Irregular Mind, please take a moment to rate it on your favorite platform. Ratings and reviews help more curious mind find us, and your feedback keeps this podcast growing and improving. Alright, ready to set sail into today's topic? In this episode, we will explore how the Atlantic world began to open up for European powers, setting the stage for centuries of exploration, colonization, and conflict. So grab your maps or your imaginations and let's embark on this next chapter together. First, let us set the scene. It's the late 1500s, and Europe is a boiling pot of tension political, religious, and economic. At the heart of this turmoil is Spain, the most powerful empire of the time, flush with the wealth from its American colonies. But Spain's dominance is about to face its first major challenge, one that will shape the course of history forever. In 1588, Spain launched the Spanish Armada, a massive fleet of 130 ships carrying 30,000 men. Its mission? To invade England and overthrow Queen Elizabeth I, a Protestant ruler who posed a threat to Spain's Catholic king Philip II. For Philip, this wasn't just about religion, it was also about power. England had been meddling in Spain's colonial ambitions, and English privateers like Sir Francis Drake had been raiding Spanish ships for treasures. An invasion seemed like the perfect solution to reassert Spain's dominance, but nature and strategy weren't on Spain's side. The English navy, though smaller, used faster, more maneuverable ships and innovative tactics. Then storms, what the English famously called the Protestant winds, scattered the Spanish fleet as it attempted to retreat. The Armada's defeat was catastrophic, marking the beginning of Spain's decline as a global superpower and opening the door for the other nations, especially like England, to expand their influence. Behind all this drama was a powerful economic theory driving European expansion: mercantilism. This idea dominated the era and shaped how nations thought about wealth and power. Mercantilism held that a nation's strength depends on its accumulation of gold and silver. To achieve this, countries sought to export more than they imported, amassing wealth through trade. Colonies became crucial to this strategy. They provided raw materials like sugar, tobacco, and silver, while serving as market for the finished good from the mother country. For Spain, the Americas were a mercantilist dream, with their vast mines of gold and silver. But as Spain's grip weakened, other European powers began eyeing these riches. England, France, and Netherlands wanted their slice of the pie, and the competition for the colonies turned fierce. If mercantilism was about wealth, religion was about soul, and these two often collided. Europe in the 1500s was deeply divided by the Protestant Reformation. By Elizabeth I's reign, Protestantism and Catholicism weren't just religious doctrines, they were political statements. Elizabeth, a Protestant, faced constant pressure from the Catholic powers like Spain, Philip II in particular. He saw her as a heretic and a threat to Catholic dominance. Meanwhile, within England, Catholics plotted against her, believing she was illegitimate. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was not just a military victory, it was a religious triumph for the Protestant England. But it wasn't just Spain and England locked in this fight. Across Europe, war of religion raged. The 30 Years' War, the French Wars of Religion, and the countless smaller conflicts pitted Protestant and Catholic nations and often neighbors against each other. These battles shaped alliances and fueled the race to colonize the Americas, where the New World became a new stage for Old World rivalries. These dynamics, military power, economic ambitions, and religious rivalry, set the stage for the flurry of European settlements in Americas. Nations that once feared challenging Spain now rushed to stake their claims. England, in particular, would emerge as a rising colonial power, planting the seeds of what would one day become the United States. With Spain's grip on Americas weakening after the defeat of Spanish Armada, a door swung open, a door that other European nations were more than eager to rush through. The 16th and 17th centuries saw a flurry of European settlement, as countries like England, France, and Netherlands scrambled to carve out their piece of the New World. This wasn't just about staking flags in the ground, it was about economic opportunity, political power, and in many cases, religious freedom. The Americas became a stage for new beginnings, with each European power bringing in its unique motivations and methods to the table. England, fresh off its victory against Spain, had big ambitions. Its settlements were not just royal ventures but also joint stock enterprises, early forms of capitalism where investors pooled in their money to fund expeditions. The goal was profit, plain and simple, though the reality was often far messier. Religious freedom was another driving force. Groups like Puritans and Pilgrims sought refuge from persecution in England, seeing the New World as a chance to build societies based on their beliefs. This mingling of profit and piety would define English colonization for centuries. To the north, France had its eye on different prize, the lucrative fur trade. French explorers ventured deep into the interior of North America, forging alliances with indigenous people to gain access to pelts like beaver fur, which was high in demand in Europe. French settlements like those in modern day Canada and along the Mississippi River were smaller and less populous than their English counterparts. Instead of displacing native people, the French often partnered with them, especially in the fur trade. However, their missionary efforts, led by Catholic Jesuits, aimed to convert indigenous communities to Christianity, blending economic and religious motives. Not to be outdone, the Dutch entered the race as one of the wealthiest and most mercantile nations of the time. With their powerful Dutch East India and Dutch West India companies, they sought to build a commercial empire in Americas. Dutch settlers established the New Amsterdam on the island of Manhattan, which became a bustling hub of trade and diversity. Even in its early years, the settlement reflected the Netherlands' reputation of tolerance, attracting people of various backgrounds and religions. Each of these European powers brought its own vision of what the New World could be. England dreamed of agricultural colonies and religious havens. France saw a network of trading posts tied to indigenous alliances. The Dutch envisioned a global trade network that spanned continents, but their settlements were often precarious. Harsh climates, conflicts with native people, and competition among European powers made survival anything but certain. These early colonies were seeds planted in rocky soil, but over time, they would grow into empires that reshaped the Americas and the world. As the flurry of European settlement gained momentum, England took its first bold step towards establishing the foothold in Americas. But let's be honest, these weren't smooth steps. The early English settlements were more like stumbles full of hardship, miscalculation, and plenty of grit. Imagine leaving everything you have ever known, crossing a treacherous ocean, and landing in a wilderness where survival was anything but guaranteed. That was the reality of England's first settlers, who ventured across the Atlantic Ocean in search of wealth, opportunity, and, for some, religious freedom. Before we dive into more enduring settlements, let's talk about a mystery: the ill-fated colony of Roanoke. In 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored an expedition to establish a settlement off the coast of present-day North Carolina. The colony struggled from the start. Poor planning, limited supplies, and tensions with local indigenous tribes made survival difficult. When a resupply mission arrived in 1590, the settlers were vanished without a trace. The only clue? The word Croatoan carved into a tree. To this day, the fate of Roanoke colonists remain one of the history's enduring mysteries. This failure didn't stop England's ambitions though. If anything, it fueled a determination to get it right. In 1607, a group of about 100 Englishmen and boys arrived in Virginia to establish Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in Americas. Backed by the Virginia Company, a joint stock company, their goal was straightforward: find gold and make profit. But gold wasn't exactly lying around, and the settlers quickly discovered that the reality of survival was much harsher than they had anticipated. Swampy land, brackish water, and disease took a devastating toll. To make matters worse, many of the settlers were gentlemen, men unaccustomed to manual labor. So, building and farming were foreign concepts to them. The winter of 1609-1610 brought the infamous starving time, a period of extreme hardship where the settlers faced starvation and death. Food supplies ran out and the desperate measures were taken. Some historical accounts suggest that settlers resorted to eating leather, rats, and even tragically, the bodies of those who died earlier. Out of the original 500 settlers, only about 60 survived the winter. The colony was on the brink of collapse, but the arrival of new supplies and leadership kept Jamestown alive. Among these leaders was Captain John Smith, whose effort to enforce discipline and establish trade with the local Powhatan Confederacy helped stabilize the colony. Jamestown's fortunes began to turn with the arrival of John Rolfe, who introduced a new strain of tobacco that thrived in Virginia's soil. Tobacco quickly became a cash crop, transforming Jamestown from a struggling outpost into a profitable venture. Rolfe's marriage to Pocahontas, the daughter of Powhatan chief Wahun Seneca, temporarily eased the tensions between the settlers and the indigenous people. However, the peace was short-lived and conflicts, including the First Anglo-Powhatan War, continued to erupt. The early English settlements were crucibles of resilience. They showed that survival in the New World required more than dreams of gold and divine purpose. It demanded hard work, adaptation, and a willingness to endure unimaginable challenges. Jamestown's success paved the way for more settlements and marked the beginning of England's growing presence in the Americas. Let us see how a leaf shaped Virginia and, by extension, the future of the United States. That leaf is tobacco. By the early 1600s, it was clear that Jamestown wasn't going to strike it rich with gold, but what it lacked in precious metals, it more than made up for the fertile soil. The real treasure of Virginia was something small, green, and surprisingly addictive: tobacco. When John Rolfe introduced a sweeter strain of tobacco in 1612, everything changed. This wasn't just any tobacco. It was a variety that could compete with the high-quality Spanish tobacco already dominating the European markets. Within a few years, the crop became a sensation. Suddenly, Jamestown had found its golden goose, or perhaps its green one. Tobacco wasn't just a crop, it was the foundation of an economy. Virginia's settlers transformed the colony's landscape into vast tobacco plantations. Exports soared, and the profits brought new settlers and investment into the region. But here's the thing: growing tobacco is incredibly labor intensive. It requires planting, tending, harvesting, and curing, tasks that couldn't be handled by the limited number of settlers in the Jamestown. Initially, the English relied on indentured servants, poor Europeans who agreed to work for several years in exchange for passage into the New World. But as the demand of tobacco grew, so did the need for labor. Over time, this demand helped entrench the brutal system of African slavery in Virginia and other colonies. Slavery became a cornerstone of tobacco economy, binding the colony's success to a system of systemic oppression that would have lasting consequences for the United States. Tobacco didn't just shape Virginia's economy, it also influenced its society, politics, and the expansion. As plantations grew, so did the need for land, which often brought settlers into conflict with indigenous people. The colony's wealth became concentrated on the hands of a few larger landowners, creating a class system that would echo throughout the American history. Tobacco's success also tied Virginia and eventually the United States to the global economy. It wasn't just local cash crop, it was part of transatlantic trade network that connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas. It's hard to overstate how much tobacco shaped early American history. Without it, Jamestown might not have survived, and England's foothold in the New World could have failed. The success of this one crop helped lay the groundwork for a colony that would grow into one of the original 13 and eventually formed the United States. But tobacco's legacy is a complicated one. While it brought prosperity to some, it also fueled the displacement of indigenous people, entrenched slavery, and created a plantation economy that would lead to deep divisions in the centuries to come. While England was building its empire in the southern part of North America, France had its eye on the northern regions, places that were often overlooked by other European powers. But the French weren't just looking for gold or land to farm. Their interest lay in trade, alliance, and a more cooperative relationship with indigenous people. France, under the leadership of figures like Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain, began its exploration of Americas in the early 1500s. But unlike the English, who focused on settling and farming, the French were much more interested in creating a profitable trade network. One of the most important commodities France sought in the New World was fur, especially beaver pelts. In Europe, fur was highly prized, particularly for making fashionable hats. The demand for fur, combined with France's ambition to establish a strong foothold in the Americas, set the stage for French colonization in Canada, along the St. Lawrence River and eventually down the Mississippi River. In 1608, Samuel de Champlain found Quebec, marking the beginning of French settlement in North America. Quebec became the capital of New France, the name given to the vast French territories in the Americas. Rather than large plantations, New France was built along the trading posts and small settlements, focused on the fur trade and supported by strong relationships with the indigenous groups like Huron and Algonquin. Unlike the English settlers, the French didn't try to push the indigenous people off their land. In fact, they relied on indigenous knowledge of the land and formed alliances for trade. This strategy allowed the French to establish a thriving fur trade that connected them to both Europe and the interior of North America. The French approach to the indigenous people of Americas was markedly different from that of the English. While the English were often involved in violent conflicts with the Native American tribes, the French were more focused on building alliances. Many French fur traders even married into indigenous families, forming bonds that both economically and socially would flourish. This alliance building helped the French maintain a presence in the vast wilderness of North America, particularly in the Great Lakes region, the Mississippi Valley, and parts of what it is today, the Canada. It was a more cooperative relationship, though not without its conflicts and challenges. Along with their economic ambitions, the French were also on a religious mission. Catholic missionaries, particularly those of Jesuit order, sought to convert indigenous people to Christianity. The French believed it was their duty to spread their faith, and they built missions across the territories. This religious push, however, wasn't always welcomed, and there were moments of tension between the French and the indigenous people over religious conversions. But despite these challenges, French missionaries did have some success in converting many indigenous groups, especially in the areas around Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. While the French never built large settlements like English, their legacy in the North America is still visible today. Cities like Montreal and Quebec City remain strong symbols of French influence. The fur trade, though it eventually waned, played a significant role in shaping the early economy of the continent. In the long run, the French were unable to compete with English for control of the North America, but their presence had a lasting impact on the culture, economy, and the geography of the continent. And in many ways, it shaped the way later settlers and even United States interacted with indigenous people and the land itself. While the French were focused on trade and alliances in northern reaches of the continent, the Dutch had their eyes on different price, commerce, and shipping. In the late 1500s, and early 1600s, the Netherlands had become one of the most powerful maritime nations in Europe, thanks to their dominance of seas, a growing merchant class, and an innovative approach to global trade. With Spain and Portugal largely focused on their vast overseas empires, the Dutch saw an opportunity to stake a claim in the Americas. In 1621, the Dutch established the Dutch West India Company, a powerful trading company designed to exploit the New World's resources. Its primary goal was to capture valuable territories and trade routes, including the sugar rich Caribbean and fur bearing lands of North America. The company played a crucial role in establishing Dutch settlements and fortifying the Netherlands' presence in America. The Dutch were not interested in building vast agricultural empires like Spanish or English. Instead, they focused on trade. New Amsterdam, the future New York City, was founded in 1624 as a trading post to facilitate commerce in the New World. The area became a hub for merchants, settlers, and a melting pot of different nationalities. What set the Dutch apart from other European settlers was their more open and tolerant approach to immigration. New Amsterdam, for example, became a diverse, multi ethnic community. The Dutch encouraged settlers from various backgrounds, including Jews, Protestants, and Catholics, to join their colony, creating a melting pot that was rare for that time. This openness helped fuel the colony's growth as merchants, artisans, and laborers from all over Europe flocked to the area to take part in the trade and opportunities. The Dutch were also less inclined to settle large swaths of land, preferring instead to establish a thriving port city that could facilitate commerce. The Dutch also quickly understood the importance of trade with the indigenous people of North America. In the Hudson River Valley, they set up fur trading posts where they exchanged goods such as metal tools and cloth for valuable pelts, especially beaver furs, which were highly prized in Europe. These trade relationships with Lenape and other local tribes were key to Dutch colony success. Just like the French, the Dutch relied on indigenous knowledge and networks to build their trade empire, and they forged alliances that would help them gain access to fur-rich deep areas within the continent. These alliances often allowed the Dutch to outcompete with other European powers for control over trade routes. While the Dutch hold on New Amsterdam was a relatively short-lived one, the impact of their colonial ventures can still be felt today. The New York City, the modern epicenter of global finance, began as a Dutch fur trading outpost. Dutch tolerance and diversity also set stage for more cosmopolitan society in the region, one that would evolve into bustling multicultural city we know today. The Dutch also played a key role in shaping the early American economy through their contributions to shipping, trade, and banking. Even after they lost control of New Amsterdam to the English in 1664, the Dutch continued to influence the development of North America, especially in areas like commerce and urban development. As we have seen, European powers, particularly Dutch, French, and English, were not just interested in settling the New World, but also in finding a direct route to Asia, bypassing the treacherous southern tip of South America. After all, that's why they started all these expeditions. This search for a new northwest passage was one of the driving forces behind any of the early explorations. Explorers like John Cabot for English, Jack Cartier for French, and Henry Hudson for Dutch all ventured into icy northern waters in the hopes of discovering a shortcut to the wealth of Asia. Unfortunately, the Northwest Passage proved to be an illusion. Hudson's journey along what we now call the Hudson River in 1609 brought him into what would later become the Dutch territory, but he was unable to find a navigable route to Asia. The passage was elusive, hidden behind the vast and unforgiving terrain of the Arctic. As the years went by, it became clear that no easy route to Asia existed through the north. However, this pursuit of Northwest Passage did not end fruitlessly. The search opened up vast new areas for exploration and settlement. The Hudson's voyages, for example, helped establish the Dutch claims to the part of North America, and his explorations paved the way for future trade routes even though they did not lead to promised land of riches in Asia. And with that, we wrap up another chapter in our exploration of the early days of European involvement in Americas. We have seen how the defeat of Spanish Armada changed the balance of power, how tobacco fueled the future of Virginia, and how the quest for Northwest Passage brought explorers into the heart of North America, setting the stage for more settlements, trade, and conflict. It's been an exciting journey so far, and I want to take a moment to thank you all for tuning in. If you are enjoying this series, I would be incredibly grateful if you could rate, review, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Your feedback and support help us grow and bring more history to life. And if you haven't listened to the previous episodes, I encourage you to check them out for the full story. Stay tuned for the next episode where we'll dive deeper into the next phase of the European settlement and the growing influence of tobacco in shaping the American colonies. Thank you once again, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Irregular Mind, where we continue to unravel the fascinating history of the United States.